we have a form of minimum wage policy via the progressive wage model. Yet, until recently, we had deemed it unwise to make it universal and still dress the policy with so many additional conditions that the incentives for upskilling turn into loopholes that employers use to retain workers on the lowest rung of wages. We warn against unaffordable costs and lost jobs, despite evidence that the majority of Singaporeans would be willing to pay more for essential services, and that the employment impact of a minimum wage is likely to be very limited.
Mr. Jamus Lim seemed to have suggested that the implementation of minimum wage can be implemented with minimal impact on unemployment. I beg to differ. I think under current times, where businesses are being challenged and we're in a period of recession, there is a very real risk that if we were to introduce minimum wage, a universal minimum wage across all sectors, I think many of our lower wage workers may lose their jobs. And from low wage, they become no wage. There are unintended consequences of some policies with good intent, but I think we must understand the context and the circumstances that we are in so that we do not unintentionally cause more distress to our lower wage workers.
There is a fundamental difference between what we've come out so far, what the government has said so far with the progressive wage model versus the minimum wage. And this is not a new concept where it's just thought of just after the elections. So if you talk to the NTUC, members of NTUC, for example, they've talked about the progressive wage model since the 2012. And there is, in fact, a key difference between PWM and minimum wage in that it is differentiated across sectors. These are pains in which the union, the government, and the employers come to a position in what is bearable by every sector. So there is differentiation by sector.
First, I would like to say, on behalf of the government, that we do believe that it is important to raise the wages of our lowest paid workers. I would not exaggerate the differences between the PWM model and the minimum wage model. The PWM model is a minimum wage plus. I would like to suggest that none of us have a monopoly over compassion. Raising the standard of living of the poor is a complicated matter. And I say this, by the way, as an economist, as someone who studies overseas experience very carefully, and who, together with my colleagues, is a practitioner. How do we do it without losing that wage earner's ability to have the pride of having a job and earning a wage?
May I?
Dr. Jamus Lim?
Yes, so very quickly, I regret if it came across that I was suggesting that only I or the party or any individual has a monopoly over compassion. In fact, that was explicitly why I did cite cases where I felt that existing policy demonstrated oodles of compassion. I even cited other members who have, not from our party, that have also talked about compassion. So I actually believe, like Minister Tharman does, that there is in fact quite a bit of daylight. There is not as much of a gap between the thinking of the two. Now, that said, I don't think that I was setting out a strawman argument in talking about an efficiency-equity trade-off. And the reason for this is because this is precisely a continuum. And I am arguing that we can move more in the direction of favoring equity over efficiency. And that was the entire point of the argument, not to create an artificial strawman.